In the beginning of the series, we see a young woman named Yu Xing-Chui being kicked out of her apartment for not paying rent. She states that since she graduated a few months ago, her landlord has raised the rent 4 times, and she has received an eviction notice twice. However, Xing-Chui maintains her optimism despite the misfortune, believing that there is always sunshine after the rain. We are then introduced to her boss, Liao Yan, who is extremely strict and obsessed with order and cleanliness. A while later, he orders Xing-Chui to bring him 2 cups of coffee to the rooftop. However, when she gets there, she notices him interacting with another guy, so she quickly leaves to ensure their privacy. Later that day, a lawyer calls Xing-Chui and informs her of her aunt's passing and that she has inherited her aunt's house. But she finds it hard to believe she's inherited a house from her aunt, who was always mean to her. Later, when she visits her new home, she is overjoyed to see how elegant and big it is. She goes upstairs and begins jumping up and down on the sofa in joy when she unexpectedly sees her boss, Liao Yan, who has just come out of the shower. When Liao Yan asks her why she's there, she explains about the inheritance and claims that it's her new home. However, it turns out she was in the wrong house and that her aunt's residence is right next door. Embarrassingly, she gathers her belongings and heads to the next house. The next morning, a representative shows up to meet Xing-Chui and hands her a huge list of maintenance fees that her aunt is obliged to pay. Xing-Chui becomes anxious when she sees the bill since she doesn't have that much money. Just then, Liao Yan arrives after his jog, and when she spots him, she asks him to lend her some money, but he just jogs away. One day, while Xing-Chui is eating river snail rice noodles while listening to loud music at her home, Liao Yan smells the food and arrives at her door to complain about the bad smell and loud noise. Later, Xing-Chui calls her friend to complain about her boss, comparing him to a dog who can smell anything from a distance. She says that Liao Yan is making her life difficult without realizing that he is standing right behind her, listening to her conversation. Later, Xing-Chui is informed by a coworker that the company will soon be terminating a few employees later that day. Hearing this, she gets scared and decides to apologize to Liao Yan by going to his house. However, when she notices that he is dressed in cartoon pajamas, she takes his picture to blackmail him and runs away. The next day, Liao Yan summons Xing-Chui to the rooftop and asks her to delete the pictures. However, she asks him to sign a neighbor agreement in exchange for deleting the pictures. The contract states things like how they must greet each other when they cross paths and that she can have rice snail noodles 3 times a week without him being able to object. Since Liao Yan refuses to sign the contract, Xing-Chui claims that she will be fired regardless, so she's not afraid to publicize the pictures. During a meeting, Xing-Chui hands Liao Yan a budget file containing his photographs. When he notices this, he closes the file and continues the meeting without a budget report. Later that day, he visits her home and hands her the signed contract, demanding she delete the photos immediately, which she eventually does. Next, Xia Henduan, a friend of Liao Yan, visits his house and calls him to say that he's outside. While waiting, he notices Xing-Chui's friend, Xiaolin, going into the house next door, and he appears to be quite taken with her. He approaches her and requests her phone number, but she ignores him and walks inside. Xiaolin is impressed by the size of Xing-Chui's home and suggests she rent it out in order to make money. Considering this a good idea, she makes an effort to find some tenants, but is unsuccessful. Next, she hears from coworkers that no one will be fired and instead, she will be receiving a salary increase. She thanks her boss for not terminating her, despite their differences. He responds that even though she's shameless, she is good at her work. One day, Liao Yan becomes ill and Xing-Chui brings him some medicine and ginger tea. She proceeds to heat the ginger tea on the gas stove and asks him to turn it off in a few minutes. Later, as she prepares to take the medicine for her fever, she realizes the medication she gave him had expired 2 years ago. When she returns to his home, she finds that the ginger tea that she had been heating has been burnt and he's passed out. After that, she takes him back to her house since his house has been damaged by fire. Soon after, Aunt Qin shows up and starts scolding Xing-Chui for setting the house on fire. In the meantime, Liao Yan wakes up and claims that it was his fault that the fire started. When Aunt Qin inquires about his presence in her home, Liao Yan responds by stating that he is both her boss and her boyfriend, which convinces Aunt Qin, and she leaves. Since Liao Yan's house is damaged by fire, Xing-Chui offers to rent a room in her house, but he declines the offer, stating that he would rather sleep on the street than rent in her house. That night, Liao Yan sleeps in his office, but he keeps having nightmares about someone jumping off a building. Shortly after, he shows up at Xing-Chui's house and says that he wants to move in, and passes out. She then calls her doctor friend Xiaolin to check on him, and when they do, give him some medication. The next morning, Xing Chui gives Liao Yan a rental contract that states things like she can eat river snail noodles whenever she wants. Liao Yan refuses, but Xing Chui somehow convinces him by telling him that since she cared for him all night while he was sick, he must sign the contract. As a result, Xing Chui and Liao Yan become housemates. Over time, they become more at ease and play silly pranks on each other at home and at work. One day, Xiaolin visits Xing Chui, and Xie Hongduan also arrives following her. While they're having dinner, he asks for the two girls' numbers, but Xiaolin declines, saying that they don't know each other well enough. Following that, Xie Hongduan requests a group chat saying that since they are neighbors, they need to stay in touch, which seems to irritate Liao Yan. Liao Yan seems to believe that he has a crush on Xing Chui. Liao Yan is jealous because Xin Hunjuan and Xing Chui are constantly calling and texting each other. But as it turns out, Xie Hongduan is only hanging out with Xing Chui to get close to Xiaolin. Later, Liao Yan is cooking dinner and waiting for Xing Chui, but she says she will be late because she is having dinner with Xie Hongduan, which makes him even more jealous. In the next scene, Xiao Kea, one of Xing Chui's co-workers, unexpectedly shows up at her house. Immediately, Xing Chui tries to hide Liao Yan so that she doesn't find out that she's living with her boss. While the girls are talking, Liao Yan texts Xing Chui that he needs to use the restroom, so that she must get Xiao Kea out of the house. He then tries to call her, but she hangs up. So he comes out and shows up in front of the coworker. Seeing him, Xiao Kea assumes that they are in a live-in relationship and promises to keep a secret in the office. Next, a display board is about to fall on Xing Chui, but just in time, Liao Yan manages to save her. When Xing Chui applies the bandages and medicine to him, Liao Yan claims that his hand is in severe pain, so that they can spend more time together. She then takes him to eat river snail rice noodles, which, after a lot of persuasion, he reluctantly eats. The following day, Liao Yan asks to catch a ride with Xing Chui, claiming that his car is broken down. Meanwhile, Aunt Chin arrives there and informs her that riding a scooter is dangerous and that the police will arrest her if she does so, and seizes her scooter. This enrages Xing Chui, and she later kicks Liao Yan's belongings out, claiming that the rent contract has expired. In the following scene, Xiaolin plans a birthday celebration for Xing Chui. The four of them celebrate her birthday, and because their houses have the same password, Xing Chui believes that it's also Liao Yan's birthday and gifts him with a Doraemon. However, he claims that it's not his birthday, but when she tries to take the gift back, he refuses to return it. After a brief conversation, she tries to get up, but he instead pulls her towards him and kisses her. Liao Yan invites her to lunch the next day, but she declines, saying that she has a date. Jealous, he questions Xie Hongduan, who then reveals that she is going on a date with her senior from college. The two of them then follow Xing Chui and discover that the senior is requesting money from her. Xie Hongduan interrupts them by spilling a soda on the guy's pants and stealing her away. Following that, Liao Yan forces the man to return all of Xing Chui's money. Later that night, Liao Yan informs Xing Chui that her senior is a con artist who has duped numerous people. Hearing this, she asks if he likes her, and in response, he leans in close, kisses her, and says he loves her. Time passes, and Liao Yan and Xing Chui are now in a relationship, and most of the people in the office are aware of it. One day, Xie Hongduan arrives at the office and snatches the candy away from Xing Chui, saying that it's Shin Shin's favorite candy, and that it's a coincidence that they share the same birthday. Liao Yan arrives and takes him to his office and asks why he's there. He then informs him that his mother has arrived. As Xing Chui is wondering who Shin Shin is, Liao Yan calls her and tells her that Shin Shin is at his house and that she can go meet her. Thinking Shin Shin must be his ex-girlfriend, she puts on makeup and a nice dress to meet her. Next, she visits Liao Yan's house and is surprised to see his mother there. He introduces her to his mother as his girlfriend. When Xing Chui asks if his mother's name is Shin Shin, a little girl enters the scene saying that she is Shin Shin. They eat dinner and get to know one another, and when his mother and sister leave, Liao Yan informs Xing Chui that his mother fled with Shin Shin many years ago because of an abusive relationship. The next day, when she asks Xie Hongduan about Liao Yan, he tells her that Liao Yan used to be an architect and that 5 years ago, someone jumped off a building he designed and out of guilt, stopped designing buildings. Hearing this, she tries to encourage him by saying that everyone should do what they love. But he misinterprets her thinking she wants to work in product design, and then moves her into the design department. She becomes angry about the transfer, and when he reminds her about the time that she said everyone should do what they love, she states that she wanted him to pursue his architecture because she knows what happened 5 years ago. This leads to a massive argument, and she leaves. Later that night, she goes to his house and apologizes to him. She tells him that her father used to work in product design and that a customer died as a result of a minor injury. Her father committed suicide 5 years ago because he couldn't bear the guilt. She goes on to say that she will give it a shot in the design department, and they embrace. A few days later, Liao's mother invites Xingchui to discuss something important. She reveals that the person who jumped from the building 5 years ago was Xingchui's father. She also says that the house in which Xingchui is currently residing is not inherited by her aunt, but instead arranged by her. Furthermore, she says that because Liao Yan is haunted by the incident 5 years ago, she wants Xingchui to help him overcome his trauma. In the following scene, Xingchui calls Liao Yang and informs him that she's been in an incident. When he arrives, she tells him that on her way back home, she wanted to buy some cakes from a roadside vendor. But just then, a car appeared out of nowhere and struck the lady. Xingchui feels that everything is her fault because if she had not stopped, the vendor would still be alive. Hearing this, Liao Yang confronts her by telling her that she is not to blame for the incident and that whatever happened is not her fault. Xingchui tells him that whatever happened 5 years ago was not his fault either, and he should not blame himself. Then she reveals that everything she said earlier was a lie. She also states that the person who jumped 5 years ago was her father, and that her father's death was not his fault, and that he should not be haunted by it. In the end, Xingchui returns the house to Liao Yan's mother, stating that she no longer requires it. Then she packs her belongings and moves into his house, where they begin their new life together. The series concludes with the two of them going to the rooftop, where he informs her that he is quitting his job to once again follow his passion for architecture.